Rittenhouse, and I'm one of the pastors here at the Valley, and I am so pumped to be here with you this morning. I have been a number one fan of All in Worship since it started. It's one of my favorite Sundays when we all get to just get in here together. I don't think there's ever been one part of worship that I've actually not bawled through because I just love being able to see the children and the teens and their parents and grandparents and everyone for all steps of life just be able to worship together, because I truly believe that's what it's going to be like in heaven. So I get the opportunity to close out this series called Tough Times. And I thought, well, this could be tricky. We have all kinds of ages in the room today, and we've all experienced different things. In fact, I asked my own daughters in preparation for today what they thought suffering was. And I got some interesting responses. So that is why I decided to collect some answers from you around the room today. Whether you're on-site or online, you had the opportunity to share about some times in which you have been through a tough time or have suffered. Some of the poll responses included eating broccoli, losing a child, battling cancer, being grounded, being in a damaging relationship or friendship, getting bad grades. I thought that kind of summed up what it was, right? Because suffering is so widespread. All of our hard times look vastly different. They're all hard, though. And I find that it doesn't matter what you're going through or what I'm going through. They could be so different. But what's the same is how it feels. How do you feel when you're going through something that's hard in your life? If you're an adult, a teen, a kid in this room, I want you to think of a time in your life where you've gone through something really hard. What have you done that's been really hard? Did you feel pain? Did you feel isolation, fear, uncertainty? Did you get angry when you were going through that hard time? You see, it doesn't matter how different our hard time is, a lot of our feelings are the same, right? A lot of the times we're feeling the same way. And as different as suffering looks, those feelings are the same, and they cultivate as you start kind of going through those difficult situations, and those feelings get bigger and bigger and bigger. I found in my experience that my brain goes somewhere. My brain asks, why? Why? In fact, I heard a story about a guy who lived in Troy, and this past winter, a man stood in his yard for 3 days straight. A man stood in this guy's front yard for 3 days straight. And get this, the owner of the property, of the house, didn't even care that there was a guy standing in his front yard. I just wondered, why in the world would he not care? Well, you want to know why? It was a snowman. Right? Our brains are innately wired that when things happen, even if it's not to us, our brain goes to why? Why? And it seems to be the same spot where we find Job today in our story. So we're going to be in the book of Job. And for those of you children and teens that haven't been along with us, the last 4 weeks we have been studying about Job. And Job was a good guy. He loved God, and he was following a life that God had designed for him. He wasn't really doing anything wrong. But guess what started happening to Job? Job lost all his farm animals. All his farm animals died. Job was a farmer. So not only did he have farm animals, but he had crops. All his crops died. Job lost his friends. Job lost his kids. And Job ultimately lost the relationship with his wife. And as we read through the book of Job, we're seeing all these things happen. And in chapter 1, verse 35, in the Kids Adventure Bible, that's where I'm going to be reading today because I love this translation. Job has lost everything. And this is what he says to God. I wish someone would listen to me. I'm signing my name to everything I've said. I hope the mighty one will answer me. You know what Job is saying? Why? Can you see Job looking up to God and saying, if I'm following you, God, why are all these bad things happening to me? And in chapter 2, God even says, Job, you didn't do anything to deserve this. Have you ever done something and you get caught? Yeah? And then you get caught and you kind of know that you deserve that consequence. Well, this was not the situation Job was in. He did not do anything to deserve what he had coming. And so we're going to enter in Job chapter 38 and 39, and we're listening to a conversation between Job asking God why. And at the beginning of chapter 38, God kind of comes to Job. And have you ever gotten a little talking to? Have you ever got, a little lesson taught to you by your parents? Well, this is kind of what God is doing in this chapter. He kind of gets on his big God-sized soapbox, gets his angry voice out, I would think, right? And he has a few questions for Job. And I honestly believe that these questions weren't just for Job, but they're for us today too. So I'm going to ask these questions, just a couple of them, from Job chapter 38. And I would love for you to answer them for me, all right? So if you are a kid in the room, you've gotten your kid box. Did you find your thumbs up and thumbs down emojis? Yes. All right. We're going to use those right now. All right. I want you to answer these questions. If you're online, I know you have emojis too. So you use those in the chat box. And if you're an adult on site, listen, we all got thumbs, right? So we're going to use those too. These are really questions from chapter 38 that God asked Job. So let's answer them together. First question, were you there? Were you there when I laid the foundations of the earth? Were you guys there? I was not. All right. Another question that God asked Job, and he asked us today was, have you ever made the morning light? Have you ever made the sunrise? Has anyone in this room ever made the sunrise? No. All right. We got some more questions. We can get some thumbs up. I'm certain of it. Can you give orders to the clouds? I mean, does Job stand a chance? These questions are so tough. All right, there's more about the clouds. Can you make the clouds give rain? Yeah, I know, right? This is starting to get depressing. Last question, because have you traveled to the springs at the bottom of the ocean? Has anyone been there before? No. These are really questions. In fact, there were way more than 5 questions that God asked Job. If you've read a book in the Bible, you know sometimes they can be lengthy. There are 2 chapters worth of questions that God asked Job, and they're all like that. They're all like that. And Job basically does what we did today. He looks at God and gives him a big thumbs down. He's like, okay, God. Okay, I get it. I don't know anything. I mean, really, truly, I guess I don't know anything. You see, our minds don't have the beginning of the capacity to understand God-sized things. Our minds don't have the capacity to understand God-sized things. I have a mirror up here. And when I look in the mirror, I see resemblances of my mom and dad. I have my mom's blonde hair, and I have the shape of eyes as my dad. Who do you look like? Has somebody ever looked at you before and said, oh my goodness, you look so much like, right? And just like someone comes to you and says, oh my goodness, you look like your mom or dad, we also resemble our Creator. We actually were designed in the image of God. God tells us in Genesis that he made us as humans to be more like him than any other creature on the earth. We are the most like him. But even though I'm a lot like God, and just like a child, I looked a lot like my parents, and even now, my parents' wisdom and knowledge and experience far exceeds mine. And just like God, there are things that are God-sized things that our minds just don't have the capacity of, despite the fact that we think we look a lot like him. There are kids in the room today. Use those thumbs up again. Have you ever paid a mortgage? Any mortgages? Do you know what is a mortgage? Have you managed an asset? Do you know what an asset is? What if you asked your kids to manage your assets? Like, what would happen in your life? Like, can you think this is going to be good? I don't know. Maybe mine would be better. I don't know. But really, truly, this is what I believe God is trying to show us in chapter 8 and 39 is that our brains are constantly trying to go to the why and try to understand why these tough times, these hard times happen to us when God is saying, Shelly, you're never going to understand. And instead of trying to figure it out up here, Shelly, I want you to learn you do have the capacity to go to the Bible. You do have the capacity to trust me. And that's a hard shift for our minds. It's something we have to train ourselves to do. And Psalm 78 pairs so well with this tough time in Job. Because you see, what's happening in Psalm 78 is we're revisiting the story of the Israelites leaving Egypt. And so if you have your Bibles today, and there's also the adventure Bibles that you use back in the kids' space available under your chairs, let's turn to Psalm 78. Because I believe that God is trying to show us that despite what we are up against in life, despite what tough situations we are in, no matter how much we fail or how many difficult situations we're up against, God's reaction to our tough times is always the same. All right? So let's look through Psalm 78. This is one psalm that I'd say, if you go home today as a family or sit at lunch, read this whole chapter together. It's so inspiring to see the tough times the Israelites face and how God and the truths and who he is, his character, his nature, how he cares for us is in here. And we're going to trace through it today, but I just encourage you to do that as a follow-up today as your family. But let's look. In verse 15, so Psalm 78, verse 15, we find the Israelites, they're homeless. They don't have a place to live, and they're in the desert. How would you feel if you're in the desert and you don't have a home? You might be thirsty, might you? All right, and they were thirsty. The Israelites were homeless and thirsty. And if you read in verse 15, it says he broke the rocks open in the desert, and he gave them as much water as there is in the ocean. So the people needed water, and God, the provider, gave them water. Then we're going to go down to verse 29. Verse 29, what's going on with the Israelites here? Well, they're thirsty. What also happens when you're thirsty and you're homeless? You might be a little what? Hungry. What do you guys want for lunch? Mac and cheese? What else do you want for lunch? Chick-fil-A, right? So there are things that we want. There are things that we crave. And guess what? The Israelites were craving something. And in this next verse, in verse 29, it says, people ate until they couldn't eat anymore. He gave them what they had wanted. He gave them all the Chick-fil-A that they had wanted, right? God cared. He didn't just give them food. He gave them what he wanted. Another truth of God can be found in verse 38 and verse 39. All right? In verse 38 and 39, we see these people, they're getting nervous. Do you get nervous in tough times? The Israelites are nervous. They start to not trust God. They're like, I know you gave me food and water, but I don't know, God. I'm starting to freak out. In verse 38 and 39, it says, but God, he wasn't mad. He was full of tender love. He forgave their sins, and he didn't destroy his people. Time after time, he held back his anger. He didn't let all his burning anger blaze out. He remembered that they were only human. He knew that they were nervous, but he was merciful in their tough time and said, I'm going to give you mercy because I know you're not God. You're human. I want you to bring your fingers in Psalm 78 down to verse 52. All right? And at this point, they were like, we are in the middle of the desert. It's starting to sink in that they're in a tough time, and they're not at the beginning, and they're not at the end. And what God does is he what? What does God do to them when they are starting to feel lost? He brought his people out like a flock. He led them like sheep through the desert. Where we're in these tough times, God's not going to leave us. He's going to lead us. And lastly, we're going to look at verse 68, because honest to goodness, have you had days where you've done so many things that just keep going the wrong way? I see my daughter give me the green thumbs up, right? Some days we have days where you just try to keep resetting, and you try to reset, and you try to say, okay, I'm going to keep my eyes on God, and then you don't. And then you're going to try to say, this is hard, but I'm going to try to keep my eyes on God, and then you don't. The Israelites did everything they could do to screw this up. But you know what? God loved them anyway. God did not give up on them. And you see in verse 68, he course corrects. He makes another way. He says, instead he chose to live in the tribe of Judah. He chose Mount Zion, which he loved. There he built his holy places, secure as the heavens, and he built it to last forever, just like the earth. You see, God cares. God was working. Remember that song? Even when we can't see it, he's working. Even when we can't feel it, he's what? He never stops. He never stops working. You see, he was faithful. That God's truth and how he cares for us in our tough times was stamped all over the Israelites' story. And if we go back to the chapter of Job, guess what? You want to know how Job's story ends? He gets all his stuff back, and God doubles it. Not only does he get his life back, but his blessings are doubled. And you see, just like God was there for the Israelites, and just like God was there for Job, we are promised in Hebrews 13:8 that God is the same when? Yesterday, today, and forever. God is writing your story right now, right this very minute. And the mark of his faithfulness is going to be in your story, just like it's in Job's and just like it's in the Israelites. You see, what God wants for us is in our tough times and in our troubles is for us to not go up here, right? To not question and wonder why, even though, yeah, you know what, we probably will. But we're going to start training our brains, just like we train our bodies to do things and play sports. We're going to train our brains to stop asking questions and to instead rest on the truths of who God is, that God does care, that God will provide for us, that when we're lost and we don't know where to go, that we can always remember that God is a way maker. And that shift will get there, because guess what? It's not our design to understand why. And a lot of people read Job, the book of Job, over and over and over and say, why do good people go through hard times? And guess what, guys? The answer isn't there. The answer is that it's beyond our understanding. But that God loves us. He's faithful, and he will provide. The question is, when you're going through a tough time right now, or at some point in your life, will you trust in his proven faithfulness? Did God have the Israelites? Did God take care of the Israelites? Yes. Did God take care of Job? Yes. And will God take care of us? Yes. We can trust God. Here at the Valley, we like to celebrate, we like to serve, and we like to prioritize responding. Those are three really important things we do here at the Valley. And so what we're going to do right now is we're going to prioritize that time to respond to God. And maybe today, as we went through some of those verses, and maybe as we talked about tough times, maybe something resonated with you. Maybe you've had one of those bad days that you just are struggling to get right, and you feel like maybe your parents don't love you, and maybe you feel like God doesn't love you. It's in here. Guess what? God still loves you. God still cares. God's going to give us what we need, and he wants to give us exactly what we crave. And so today we have an opportunity for you to respond. And I think God gets super excited when we make movements in our life towards him. When we take situations in our heart and respond to his heart in love. And so we have different stations set up around our room today. And I don't know, I think it's going to look a little bit different for all of us. Maybe today you just need to sit in your chair and you just want to pray. Maybe you're going through something tough and you just want to give that to God today by talking to him. We also have a prayer bench up front. Maybe you just want to come down here and pray up front. We also have communion in all four corners of our room. We're also going to have people walking around with communion cups to deliver to you in your seats. But maybe today you want to take communion as a family or as a friend group or with the people in your row, and just use that as an opportunity to surrender those things that are in your life. And you know what? Maybe you're not going through a tough thing right now, but God tells us that it doesn't matter how much we love him and how hard we follow him, that guess what? It says we're all going to have trials. We're all going to have tough times. And so maybe we want to surrender to this morning to training our brain so that when that tough time comes, we've got those promises of God, his faithfulness, those truths of who God is so ingrained in our brain that we don't go into some of those questions, that we go straight to the truth. So maybe you're going to take communion together. We also have candles up here. Maybe today you just want to light a candle, and that's a time. That's a time you're going to surrender your situation. You're going to give up your questions. Or maybe you've been like Job, and you've had a little bit of a false authority with God. And you want to light a candle today and surrender to that. Or you can go, we have some new ways to respond this morning. We have some little trading posts that are located up here at the cross and in the back of the rooms. And there are Post-it notes with your chairs today. And maybe you're going through a tough time today and you're going to just write that on there. Maybe you're not excited about school starting. all right? And you're afraid to go into a new classroom, a new grade level, a new building. Maybe you need to give that to God today. So what we're going to do is we're going to write those tough situations, those tough times that we're going through, or questions that we have, and we're going to wad them up. We're going to wad them up, and we're going to put them in that trading post. We're going to give them to God. And then in those trading posts, there's also a reminder of God's truths. Those same truths that we read about in Psalm 78 today. That he cares. That he provides. That he has mercy on us when we just keep screwing up. And that he loves us relentlessly. So I don't know how you want to respond to God today, but I'm going to invite you to stand. I'm going to invite you to sit if you want to sit and pray. I'm going to invite you to move around the room, whatever you're going to do. But let's utilize this time. Keep this time reverent. And let's take a step of obedience towards God this morning.